Hello and welcome to our webinar on advocacy for gender just climate action. We are still letting in people from the waiting room, so we will wait another 2 to 3 minutes and then immediately start. Please use the chat box to introduce yourself and mute your microphone that we don't have any echo. Thanks so much. You will have the chance to discuss and ask questions at the end of the webinar.
Hi everyone, I am Namita Nupani from Nepal and I am representing from the organization Women Network for Energy and Environment. Thank you.
Hello?
Please use the chat box to introduce yourself and just mute your microphone that we don't have any interference. Thank you so much.
Hello everyone, I'm called Joshua Makawa. I'm representing the community of Sant'Egidio, the community that works with the Human Rights Department to support the poor, refugees, and also the displaced persons.
Hi everyone, this is Chansana Chakma from Chittagong Hill Tracts of Bangladesh. I'm working for indigenous women here and also climate change. Thank you.
Hey everyone, we are so glad that you're on the call. Please mute your microphone and use the chat box to introduce yourself in written. Thank you so much, and we are just about to start. We just lost one of our presenters and make sure that she can join again. Just a second.
Pat, this is Mara. Can you make sure to make Tara a host, co-host?
Yes, thank you. So we are still having people joining, but I think it is time to start our webinar today on advocacy for gender just climate action. Welcome to everyone who have already joined. And I would like to start with some basics to make sure everybody can access the webinar and follow. You should all be able to see my screen with slides. And if you have troubles, please indicate in the chat box.
It's okay.
Okay, here we go. So first of all, on the bottom of your Zoom app, you should be able to see a microphone, participants, and a chat box button to make sure that you have access to everything and you are able to mute your microphone when you are not speaking. Most importantly, we do have a translation for Spanish and French today. So you see a little globe in the bottom next to your microphone and participants and so on. And if you go on the globe, you can select your channel in French and Spanish and follow the interpretations there. It is shown in the picture on the right, how to access those. I will give you a very quick moment. Furthermore, we would like to ask you to turn your camera off if it affects your connection negatively, and be sure that you remove all restrictions and be present, indicating with a smile, nodding, or shaking your head maybe. You can use the chat box for communication. In particular, if you would like to speak, you can raise your hand in the chat box in the discussion and question session. You can also use the chat box if you have joined later to indicate your name, where you are coming from, your organization, what you are working on, your preferred pronoun, and say hello to everyone. I have seen that Spanish is working well. I hope the same is true for the French channel. But if you have any troubles with accessibility, we have an accessibility coordinator today, who is Mara from WeDo. You can contact Mara in the chat box with a private message or write her an email. You can also give feedback at the end of the session if you have any feedback to us. In case you would need the presentations in French and Spanish, Tara will share them in the chat. I will just give Tara a second to be sure that you can access the slides. Thanks so much, Tara. We are now on the second slide, and all speakers will indicate if we are moved to the next slide. And if we are in a transition slide, I will just let you know that the page number we are on at the moment. We will start with a couple of inputs. So please put your questions into the chat box now and raise your hand if you would like to speak later on. With that, I think I have introduced you to all our house rules, and you have hopefully access to all your necessary supporting tools. And I would just like to quickly share with you that we are recording the session. So in case you would not like to be on the screen, please turn off your camera. And you can also change your name in the 2 dots next to your name or to your picture to make sure that you are appearing the way you want to appear in the session. So before we dive into the webinar, I would like to share a quick poll with you, which is our icebreaker for today. I launched the polling now. The question is, what is your favorite way in fighting for gender just climate action? In case you cannot see the poll, I will just type in the question once more for all of you. And you can also type your answers into the chat box. So you can say that you are building a feminist climate justice movement as your favorite activity, being a classical advocate in policy formulation, being a working bee, and enacting gender just climate actions locally or with policy implementation. You like to be a watchdog with policy monitoring. You love media work, either in traditional media or online and in social media actions, or you love organizing and joining in demonstrations, legal actions, or also civil disobedience. I will give you another 1 minute to choose, because we have only a few answers. I have seen in the chat box that we should better enable multiple responses. That's true. I was thinking about it, but I thought it would be fun to also select your favorite one. I see that I was asked to share the question again. So the question is, what is your favorite way in fighting for gender just climate action? You can still use the chat box for giving your answers, but I will close the polling now and show it to you. So most of us love to be a working bee and acting for gender just actions locally and in policy implementations. There are also many people that like to build a feminist climate justice movement, which is wonderful. And we do have people actually using each of the strategy as a favorite strategy, and that is wonderful. And I hope we have a great discussion later on. Thank you so much. So moving to the next slide. Apologies, it always takes a while. Here we go. So this is our agenda of today. This is actually today the start of a webinar series of the Women and Gender Constituency. And what we would like is to use the next 1.5 hours to share with you the advocacy, strategies, and experience from the Women and Gender Constituency and from our Gender Just Climate Solutions on local level. And we hope that this is actually useful for you in strengthening your advocacy, but we would also like to give the floor to discussion and experience exchange at the later stage, because we know this is only a view from the international level and from some local level, and advocacy for gender just climate action can be very different on each level. So we will start with introducing our work of the Women and Gender Constituency and the Gender Just Climate Solutions. Then we will go into examples of gender just climate solutions and advocacy with Banka BioLoo and the Gender into Urban Climate Change Initiative. We will then continue with some advocacy approaches and sources for information, give you an outlook of plans of the Women and Gender Constituency, in particular this year, and then we have time for questions and discussions where you can share your experience and start to discuss about gender just climate action from your perspective. And having said this, I would like to hand over to the first speaker, who is Gina Cortés.
Hi, good day, everyone. Thank you,
Gina.
Patricia. Hi, my name is Gina Cortés Valderrama. I'm part of WCF, and this is an organization based in Germany, in Munich. I work on the topics of gender and climate policy, and this is one of the founding members of the Women and Gender Constituency. And today I'm going to talk to you a little bit more about the constituency, the work that we do, and our principles. So the constituency is formed as a result of a collective effort from different NGOs. And in 2009, it was funded as an observer constituency to the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change. And in that sense, it achieved granted full status as an observer constituency in 2011. In 2015, the Gender Just Climate Solutions Awards program was launched, and I will come back to this in a moment. And for today, we count with around 32 member organizations with an official accreditation to the UNFCCC and also to a network of over 500 different groups and individuals. Next slide, please. Takes a little bit. Yeah, great. So in our next slide, you can see our goals. We have set through all these years different goals. And first of all, we want to promote human rights, gender equality, and the full and effective participation of women at all levels of decision making. That also includes in all policies and all different measures that are related to climate change. As well, to provide a voice to women and to formalize and unify the different perspective of women and gender groups, but also of different civil society organizations which are active under the UNFCCC processes. This also providing all the members to raise their concerns and suggest different priority actions that will enable them to formulate and democratically share different positions that the WGC shares through the different channels, network, etc. Yeah. The constituency as well aims to further expand the outreach and the engagement through different and various groups. And as an overall goal of the constituency, we want to ensure the global commitment to embrace gender equality, women's rights, especially towards climate change. Next slide, please. So, yeah. So the Women and Gender Constituency members all work together in order to promote, as I mentioned, the full realization of the human rights and the women and girls' rights through clear and different measurable purposes, actions, and objectives. Yeah. And part of our principle is to have the democratic and a participatory governance, which also enhances a respectful collaboration among the different members of the civil society of the different sectors, that especially including and integrating diverse positions. Yeah. And this also includes as a principle an inclusive membership in which the equitable approach to representation, affiliation, age, and different ability encourage each of the members on our collective and individual history, like to build on our history. And also part of our principles is that we have transparent and timely procedures within the WGC that provides in that manner a platform for women leadership, a safe and participatory space in which everyone has access. And finally, we mentored the young generations and all the newcomers to the movement and to the constituency, so we can keep on working through the next years and the next generations, always having in mind our goals and our principles. Next slide, please. So the Gender Just Climate Solutions, as I already mentioned, is an award that is given year by year, starting in 2015, and it has the main objective to showcase, amplify, and scale gender-responsive transformative climate initiatives. This is a key program of the Women and Gender Constituency due to this strong link with our advocacy principles and goals, and also because it clearly reflects how effective climate action looks like when it does integrate the gender dimension as part of its core effort. So all these different examples that you're also going to see in today's session are part of it, of how effective and real and ambitious climate action look like when you also integrate the local perspective, when you have a bottom-up approach. And in these awards, we encourage all type of activists, grassroots, and women-led organizations and groups to participate year by year. Next slide, please. So there is a certain criteria to make the selection of the awardees. The awardees create impact in climate, in gender, and these initiatives can be also have the aim to be shared, spread, and also to scale up. So one of the criteria is that they provide equal access and benefits for women, men, and youth, and also that the initiatives addresses different aspects of empowerment, such as the achievement to enhance mobility and accessibility of different resources, enhance livelihood security, food security, health, and the access to all the different resources. It also promotes women's democratic rights and the participation of women by ensuring decision-making processes that integrate communities and cooperatives. And also part of the criteria is that these projects are locally led and or locally driven. And of course that they contribute to mitigation of climate change or the adaptation to climate change, and they have tracked also the reduction of emissions. These also taking into account that the initiative shows different linkages with multiple cross-cutting issues and that create multiple benefits, for example, in peace building or in food security or in water and sanitation. Next slide. So year by year, we have 3 different award winners. One is part of the technical category, the second one is non-technical, and the third one is transformative. These are the 3 categories in which we can, or an organization can win. They participate in an award ceremony at the COP. So year by year, we have this award ceremony, we have different speakers, we invite different members of ministries, national delegates, and different people that, which also the awardees can create a network and can also expand this impact that they do. They receive a small monetary prize and become part of a mentoring program that we have built during the past years. So these winners, together with the nominees, are part of a publication in which we can see the featured solutions. We can see also different solutions that are part from the Women and Gender Constituency. These are also included. And we have some educational posters that are disseminated at the SB meetings or at different climate conference, climate weeks, etc. In 2019, that means last year, we had the publication in Spanish, French, and English. And before we had it in English and French. And next slide, please. So you can find all this information. You can find all the gender just climate resources in our database. You can follow the link womengenderclimate.org, and there you can find all the educational posters and the different tools that are also key for advocacy. You can read the summary of the solution, going through the different categories that I mentioned, the climate impact, the gender impact that they create, and also the replicability and scalability. So in case you have any question, I think you can contact us, or you can also leave a question in the chat box, and I give the floor back to Patricia. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Gina, for sharing the work of the Women and Gender Constituency as well as the Gender Just Climate Solutions. We would like to dive in now into the examples of Gender Just Climate Solutions and advocacy on the ground. Our first speaker will be Madina Amin Hussein, who is based in Kenya and will tell us more about the mitigation initiative. Madina is passionate about conversation culture, and I'm very excited to hand over to you. Madina, please unmute yourself. If possible, please start your video that people can see you talking, and you can start your presentation. Madina, we cannot hear you right now. Could you try to talk again?
Hi, you hear me? Are you in a position?
Maybe it's better to actually stop the video in case you started it, because your connection is a little bit interrupted. So if you would not mind, it might be better to just use your microphone. Sorry for that.
It's okay. Oh my God. Can you hear me, please?
We can much better now. Thank you.
You hear me now?
We do, but I think it would be useful to turn off your camera still.
Oh my goodness.
Please try again to start your presentation.
Well, okay, I'm Madina from Kenya. So, am I loud enough?
You are, we can hear you. Thank you.
Well, okay, thank you so much. My name is Madina Amin Hussein from Global Nature Conservation in Kenya. We work we focus on how to improve how to promote gender justice and climate action, and also in zero hunger. So we innovated a project by the name mitigation, and then this project is a citizen science project in conservation agriculture, which aim to train women smallholder farmers become citizen scientists and contribute to climate change mitigation, adaptation, and food security. Therefore, we use fruit farming as a vehicle for women, build their own support system to become independent and empowered decision makers. And the reason as to why we are trying to focus on women smallholder farmers is because of the patriarchy of the society I come from, whereby women play a vital role in natural resource management. Women manage water sources. They manage wood fuel and take part in production of the food. 70% of the food consumed in my locality. Yet when it comes to policy implementation and decision making, these women are left behind. So we advocate for women involvement in climate action, and we are trying to ensure that women are part of the climate negotiations. So in Mitikash, we do we train women smallholder farmers on climate smart agriculture and sustainable farming. In this year, we developed an app. Yeah, so, and the app is called Barrier. So Barrier is a Somali word. And it means small farm or a small garden. So with these women farmers, we use Androids, mobile phone or telephones in the mapping and registering of farmers. And we register the farmers so that they get the needed information on what to plant, weather, and also market, the demand of the crops they grow in the market. Yeah, that is one. And right now we are working with, so far we trained 600 farmers, and we are trying to scale up our work as time goes by. So we also test crop varieties with our women smallholder farmers, the women we work with, and make analysis based on growth rate of the crops, surplus production, yield, and adaptability of the crops to the environment. Later, after drafting conclusions, we train our farmers on climate smart agriculture, bearing in mind that I come from a dryland Kenya. Our place is dry, and at least that is why our women are disproportionately affected during drought and famine because like there's a lot of issues here. Yes. Hi.
Hi, Madina. Should I change to the next slide?
Yeah, so I was like, am I loud enough so that I'm being heard by everyone?
I think we can hear you clear and well. Thank you.
Thank you. So I was saying that in Mitikash we focus in working with women, smallholder farmers, and young people. And the reason that's why we are trying to do that is because of the this place of ours is a dry land, and when it comes to drought and famine, young people and women are the people who are the first responders to drought or to climate change. But when it comes to implementing policies and things like land ownership or training or financial resources, the people who are majorly affected are left behind. So we wish or we want to promote a world whereby women are independent and empowered decision makers. You can move to the next slide, please.
So we are now on the Miticash results slide, also for everyone listening in French and Spanish. Thank you, Madina.
Yeah, sorry, thank you. Okay, some of the results of the Miticash is that first, we are working with 600 women farmers, women smallholder farmers whom we train. We give them inputs, some credits, supports, and yeah, so, and these women farmers, since our inception, they started becoming resilient because after the training, they grow drought-tolerant crop species, and at least right now they're able to get food throughout the year because we have two seasons. One is the long rain seasons, which starts from March to July. And we have the short rain seasons, which begins from October to December. Due to our trainings and our engagement, our farmers, our women smallholder farmers, are able to grow drought-tolerant crop species and get food throughout the year. When they grow surplus produce, they take it to the market, and income got from the sales of the crops are used in other family needs, such as hospital bills or sometimes tuition fee. Yeah, and we are trying to scale up our work with time. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you so much, Madina. We will have time to ask questions at a later stage, so just keep your questions for Madina until the end and stay with us. Our next gender just approach on the ground is the BioLoo project. And I would like to introduce Sanjay Banka, who is the chairman of BioLoo, and we will hear more from Sanjay about their project. Please unmute yourself and let's start the presentation. Also, just as a quick reminder, if I should move to the next slide, please just say next slide. And for all people listening in the French and Spanish channel, we will now move to Banka BioLoo.
Thank you, Patricia. Audible and clear enough?
You are. Thank you very much.
Right. So I was just thinking a while ago, being a climate complementing solution and a gender just solution, there you could find the two on the two extremes, or rather two different ones. But combining the two, it really becomes difficult. And when we install the BioLoos, I think we are privileged enough to combine the climate complement complementing or climate positive and the gender just nature of the solution. So next slide, Patricia. Thank you. This is a BioLoo which we install anywhere and everywhere. Though we are currently doing in India alone, but the potential is across different continents. So we have a very simple structure, the toilet structure. It could be of RCC, reinforced cement concrete, which gives the feeling of a wall, or we could have fiber plastic or puff panels as the user prefers. Then beside the toilet, we have a biodigester tank wherein the fecal matter goes in and is treated by a certain bacterial culture. So it's an all-in contained solution, does not require any external support for waste treatment or whatsoever. The tank, biodigester tank, does not need to be emptied. The water that comes out, as you can see on the right of the biodigester tank, it's good for gardening. And we see lush green gardens and vegetation whenever the water has been used. No energy requirement in the functioning of the BioLoo. It's a self-contained system and runs on an autopilot mode. Next slide. Right. So, I mean, I don't know if I could put it that way, but we men, we can stand and pee anywhere. But I mean, obviously the girls and women can't. So when we evaluated the BioLoo, we realized that the benefit to the women are more, and we could list the three of them, which are very direct. Ensures security. The BioLoo ensures security, which for that matter any toilet does. So we have had cases of molestation, rapes, etc. in India and probably other countries. So a toilet is a must for many women and girls. It enhances dignity and obviously health and hygiene. On the menstrual hygiene aspect also, BioLoo has been seen to be supportive, especially for girls in schools. And school sanitation program is one of our foremost sanitation activities. Next, please. So we install BioLoos almost everywhere in all settings, be it at homes, again, women and girls, including teenagers, elderly women, they benefit more than the men. The men can easily go out and defecate, which was the norm in India before the Clean India mission began. But after that, in the last 5 years, millions of toilets have been built, and we have built over 10,000 BioLoos. We work with a number of large companies, and their CSR programs we have installed in that country, and we'll see more of it in the following slides. Wash for work. So installing BioLoos at work so that men and women both benefit and their productivity increases. And women, for them, it's more, and their daytime hygiene needs also can be taken care of. We install BioLoos in healthcare facilities. So, I mean, and it's more pertinent during this pandemic times when the visits of people or patients to the healthcare facilities is all the more within communities, in societies. So it's a good solution, gender friendly as well as climate positive across all settings, climatic conditions, across different geographic terrains. Next, please. So this is one instance of a BioLoo block in a school. So we have, it's a primary school in one of the states in India. Here we provided two BioLoos for girls, 2 for boys, along with water facility. And I don't know if you can see, but there are small 2 wash basins, hand wash facilities on either side towards the extreme ends. And then there's a partition between the BioLoos for boys and girls. So this is typical of how we do it in schools. And sanitation in schools is obviously one of our favorite programs. We believe that it enhances the dignity and security of the girls studying in the schools. So similar is the thing for other settings also. but schools is one of our favorite programs. Next, please. Right. So last year in 2019, we were selected by United Nations Development Program's business call to action to conduct impact assessment. And we did it in the state of Rajasthan, in the district of Alwar, where we have implemented around over 4,000 BioLoos in 500 schools over a 5-year period. These are various positives that had come out of the impact assessment study, and notably are that the presence of a BioLoo in the schools, it increased the attendance rates of students, more so for the girls. It reduced the dropouts. This is one of the unfortunate aspects because the girls, they need to tend to take care of household chores, and they have to drop out, unfortunately. But the BioLoos, that was a strong motivation for them to continue. So likewise, there's huge positive impact of the presence of BioLoos for water, sanitation, and hygiene in all settings. I think this should be the last.
Yes, thank you so much, Sanjay, for your practical introduction and example from India. As with the last example, I would just like you to think about the questions and get back to Sanjay at the end of our question and discussion section. I would like now to hand over to Ndivile Mokoena, who is based in South Africa, Johannesburg, and she is a passionate climate justice advocate and likes to work with grassroots communities as much as with IPCC scientists. And she's also our WGC Co-Focal Point from the Global South, and will also be a speaker later on again. So Ndivile, I would ask you to unmute yourself and hand over to you. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Patricia. Can you hear me?
I can hear you very well. And please indicate when I should move to the next slide.
Okay. Thank you so much for the introduction. And hi everyone. I will take you through our project, which is GUCCI. It stands for Gender into Urban Climate Change Initiative. It is an international project coordinated by GenderCC International based in Berlin. And the project is implemented in 4 countries in India, Indonesia, Mexico, and in South Africa. The main goal of the project is to make local and national climate policies responsive to gender issues. And our theory of change is based on exchange of knowledge. We meet from time to time as the 4 countries where we exchange knowledge, we share and learn from each other, exchange our experiences, because the project is the same project applied in different countries. The method is one, the tools we're using, it's the same tools. However, because of the different contexts in our separate countries, we find it necessary that we need to share and learn from each other, because some of the challenges are common, are unique. However, in most of the instances, they will be different because of the different context in our countries. And the next theory of change is the policy assessment. We assess the policies from local to national government, and we're looking at climate change policies, the mitigation and adaptation policy, where we try and influence and advocate for the mainstreaming of gender in those policies. We work with the officials in the different government department, and we also target key people, policy makers, decision makers, people who are doing planning of climate change measures and actions. We also work with communities, civil society organizations, and other stakeholders who are involved in the climate change discourse. We do campaigns and workshop and implement projects at local level. The main purpose of the campaigns is to raise awareness and send out our advocacy message out there to the public at large and to mainly the government officials, because our main goal is to influence the policies to be gender sensitive. And also the projects that we implement at local level are with communities. It's projects that are going to demonstrate gender just solutions, help communities to adapt to climate change, and also build resilience at local level. We do capacity building workshop for the officials, government officials across all levels, all spheres of government, local, provincial, and national. And we do workshops as well with local communities where we raise awareness about climate change and gender issues. The nexus, the main thing is the nexus of gender and climate change. You can move to the next slide, Patricia. This is our assessment tool, the methodology that we apply when we assess the policies. It's called GAMA, which stands for Gender Assessment and Monitoring of Mitigation and Adaptation. It is done in 3 steps. The first step, which we call it GAMA 1, it's the assessment of the institutional and procedural framework. Here we're looking at urban institutions and the procedures that they apply and whether they are able to address climate change and integrate a gender dimension. This is where we do this in a form of interviews. This is where we target the key people in each department that is doing work that is related to climate change. We're looking at climate experts, gender experts, if they are there, because it's hardly to find them in the government departments. Also policymakers, people who do planning, and decision makers. We interview those people. Then we do a scorecards, which will tell us how is their performance and how is their approach on gender issues. And in most instances, you find that the score we get is 0 because there is no thought of gender or any perspective that is gender related in their planning, their actions, and their programs. So the main question that we ask with GAMA 1 is who is involved, who is doing the planning, who is taking decision, and when they consult or consult communities, who participates in those consultation meetings, and when they do planning and decision making, who participate, who is involved? Do they involve communities? Do they involve women organizations? Do they involve gender experts? Then the next step is GAMA 2, where we're looking at the assessment of national climate action programs. Here it's a comparison between the actual policy and the measures to implement climate action at local level. We're looking for possible or potential gender co-benefits. So the main question we ask here is what is being done to implement climate change measures, and what approaches are they used in order to accommodate a gender perspective. Then the third step is GAMA 3, where we select certain policies and we assess them. For an example, we can take a policy on economic development or energy or water or agriculture. Then we assess that policy, we look for any possibility of including a gender dimension. There's always a possibility in any case to do that, but we're looking mainly on ways that that particular policy can be improved, that it can contribute to gender equality. So in our assessment, we will identify gaps and then make recommendations to the government official that this is how you can integrate gender. This is an approach that you can use. So in this particular step, the question is the how. How do they, how can they integrate gender into their policies, or integrate gender or consider gender into their climate actions and measures at local level? We can move to the next slide, Patricia. Okay, so in this slide, I'm just going to share with you some of our advocacy activities that we're doing locally, especially in South Africa. If you can see the two pictures, the one below is from our colleagues in Indonesia, where they were doing a workshop with women, showcasing, you know, differentiated impacts of climate change. And the picture there on top, that's in South Africa, where we were doing a stakeholder consultation workshop. Normally, we have pre-COP consultation and post-COP consultation. In this particular one, it was after COP 24, where we were giving feedback to the community. What we normally do before the COP, we have a stakeholder consultation where the local organization and civil society, we come together to say, as civil society, as women's organization, these are our demands, this is what we want to see. And that we give to our government during their stakeholder workshop, that we want you to take this to the COP. And then after the COP, we come back and we report back to the people that these are the results of the COP, this is what happened. So in this particular workshop, I invited the government officials. There were national government representatives who are part of the negotiating team at the COP. It's two ladies who are sitting there who had to give back to a feedback to the people. What is the government doing? What transpired from the COP, and what is the position of the government? And one of the ladies there, fortunately, is the national gender focal point for South Africa. Also, the local ward councillor was also invited to also say locally what are they doing as a local government and the provincial government. So those are some of our advocacy activities. We also, part of the National Government Climate Change Consultation Forum, which meets quarterly. All stakeholders are involved there. The government will give us their position, what is happening in the country, and we will make our interventions there. So that's one of the platforms that we use to raise gender issues, to raise the voices of the local people. We also had a privilege of commenting in the national climate policies. We had a comment in the National Climate Change Bill and the National Climate Change Adaptation Strategy, where the government will send us the policy to say, have your comment as GenderCC, and we always give an input of a gender perspective. However, you know, at the end of the day, when the final document is out, there is not even a reference of our input. However, we do not despair, we'll keep on doing it. Currently, what we're doing, we're working with, we collaborate with UNIDO for a national program which is called Economic Empowerment of Women in Green Industry. UNIDO is working together with UN Women and GenderCC. We are part of the steering committee there. We are assessing economic development policy, especially in green industry, to see if there is a gender component, to see if there is a consideration and a gender perspective in them, and then comment, and then we send them out to the department. In this particular program, we work with the Department of Women, Children and People of Disability, and also with the Department of Economic Development. And forthcoming, we're looking forward to work with the government on national NDCs. They haven't started yet, mainly because of the COVID-19 disruptions. So we're looking forward to the consultation that they are going to do when they start reviewing the NDCs. And also we are in discussions with the National Gender Focal Point on how we can nationalize the Gender Action Plan. So she was told by the head department that there's no budget for that, but she's trying because she is willing to raise funds so that we can see how we can nationalize the Gender Action Plan. Thank you. Yeah, I will pause there for now. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Ndivile, for sharing with us your rich experiences. And we will actually also hear more from Ndivile in our next part, and we are looking at the international level. So what we are going into now is advocacy approaches and sources of information. And we would like to share with you the experiences of the Women and Gender Constituency and provide you some tools and experience that we have made on the international level or that were made from our partners. But these are just, of course, some pieces of the puzzle that all fits into the gender just climate advocacy. And we hope that you can share more of your experiences, and we should not forget that the target or important support for all the advocacy is that our movements are actually coming together and build up for a joint force to address the multiple crises that we are currently facing. So it doesn't matter if you are sharing your experiences from the feminist movement, from people with disabilities, from indigenous peoples, from the Black movement, or whatever you are actually working in. All those movements are connected, and we need to have a bigger solidarity and getting together of those all, because all the crises are interconnected. So now we will have a part where myself will be presenting, but also Ndivile Mokoena again from GenderCC Southern Africa, as well as my colleague Tara Daniel, who is working for BioLoo. And she is a great climate finance geek and also helping building up capacity for new negotiators. And I'm very happy to be able to hand over to you, Tara. Thank you so much. And please let me know when I should go to the next slide.
Great, thank you so much, Patricia. Let's jump right in with the first slide. Because when we're, actually going to move past these slides in the interest of time. But as we're starting to talk about evidence that can help support your advocacy, we want to highlight that some of the first and best sources of evidence are your experiences. You've just heard some experiences from some gender just climate solutions earlier in this webinar, and that there's a database of over 100 of them, but these are some other compilations of case studies and stories of experiences, including from the climate funds, really showing the incredible benefits when gender is mainstreamed into projects. So we want to make sure that we're always talking about the full picture of what it looks like when climate solutions are done right. However, as we move on to the next slide, we also recognize that there's also a lot of asks about what evidence is there for why we should be considering gender. Why does gender make a climate solution more effective, more sustainable? And one place that we can look at this is peer-reviewed literature, just recognizing that this is academic work that's been reviewed by other peers working in that area before it's published. And however, we see that when we start looking for this type of academic and scholarly evidence, that a lot of it is buried within specific areas. So, and we know that climate challenges are often addressed through multiple sectors. So looking for just climate evidence is not as useful as looking for evidence that might have to do specifically with an area that you're working on, agroecology or forest management or mangrove restoration. And we also recognize that there's limitations in peer-reviewed literature. So I do want to highlight some peer-reviewed literature that I find useful when folks say, but what's the evidence for integrating gender? But we really want to recognize these limitations as we're trying to use this as only one part of our overall advocacy for integrating gender into all climate approaches. So as we move on to the next slide, the first article that I wanted to highlight is really this idea that gender quotas are increasing the equality and effectiveness of climate policy interventions. That's the title of the article. The title of the article says itself what we know has proven true in so many of our experiences. This was published in the journal Nature Climate Change. It looked at groups across 3 different countries. And it also is not just a single article, but I really think about it as part of a much bigger piece of literature showing what happens when more women are involved in participating and leading in climate solutions. So we're looking at issues of environmental outcomes being strengthened here, as well as greater equity with the pay. So we have this example. As we move on to the next slide, here's just another example of the peer-reviewed literature. And that next example is very different because it asks this overarching question. Again, this is the title of the article, asking this question: can climate finance contribute to gender equity in developing countries? And it's really nice to see the literature say what we all know to be true, which is yes. And we have a very great quote that happens that the authors concluded that if climate finance is not paying sufficient attention to gender gaps, then we're looking at exacerbating existing structural inequalities. The next piece that I want to look at in the next slide is another one of those pieces or articles that's a part of a lot of larger literature looking at the relationship between women's political participation and the carbon dioxide emissions of a country. This was one that came out in 2019 using statistical methods. That's what this heterogeneous dynamic panel analysis is referring to. And we see that it finds that carbon dioxide emissions are lower where women's political empowerment is greater. This is a finding that we've already seen in other literature, but what I really loved about this piece is it looked at sub-dimensions of political empowerment and found that the greatest contributor to this effect was women's civil society participation. All right, so next slide. As we consider all of this, we also want to recognize that we can go ahead on to the next slide and transition into mandates, because as we consider all of this, we do want to think about it as just one piece and one way to help strengthen our advocacy. And Patricia is now going to talk about some other tools and resources that we have at our disposal, which are the different mandates that exist for gender equality. Go ahead, Patricia.
Thank you so much, Tara, and thanks so much for sharing the important and supporting resources that already exist for our advocacy. And I'm now going into the mandates for gender equality. It's very similar to the data and studies that were just shared by Tara. They can support your advocacy, and often it is, when I move on to the international human rights agenda, for example, that the framework for gender just climate action does already exist, in particular on international level, but often also on national level, on regional level, or subnational level. The main problem usually is that it is not implemented or materialized, but often the framework is already there. And those frameworks that I will just introduce, so I will go from the very broad frameworks to more technical UNFCCC language and frameworks, do help you, in particular if you are talking to decision makers in supporting your arguments and convince them to act, because what they should do is nothing new. It is actually implementing what they have signed up for. So, as you know, the international human rights frameworks thus widely support and protect the equality of men and women. This started with the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, and it continues throughout the last decade, so they are really old already, to a rather new support or declaration to protect the rights of indigenous people. And you should know that all those human rights frameworks, you do not only find references to gender equality, but also you often find references to climate change or environmental protection. So, as you might all know, the Rio Convention, the Rio Declaration already has a perspective on gender equality, which was also taken over in the Convention on Biological Diversity, as well as the Convention on Combat Desertification. Small remark, because I'm a little bit too quickly, we are now on slide 38, in case you follow in the different language channels. Moreover, we have the Sustainable Development Goals since 2015 that have a very comprehensive approach on the different causes of inequality, and they call for a future we want and we also support and make sure that nobody is left behind. And usually those goals are very useful in your advocacy work, no matter if you're working on gender equality, on climate change in cities, on water and sanitation issues, or international cooperation. So do not forget to check about those. Moreover, for example, CEDAW does have already a general recommendation that refers to gender-related dimension in disaster risk reduction in the context of climate change. So those human rights frameworks help you in underlining your arguments, and you can use it as a tool to convince decision makers. We would now like to move on to the UNFCCC framework. And in case you are not familiar with the UNFCCC framework, please don't hesitate to get back to questions to us afterwards. So I'm moving now on to the next slide. As said before, the UNFCCC was actually rather ignorant and not having gender language in the very beginning. This has slowly evolved. However, if you are working on gender equality issues, you might be surprised about the language that is used and recognized, because it has improved a lot, but it is still, for example, a very binary language. It is just starting to accept the importance of intersectionality and recognizes that there are intersectional forms of discriminations, or also only now starts to mainstream gender throughout all fields of climate action, including climate ambition, including just transition, or climate finance. So this is something to keep in mind. The piece that I will now introduce to you is the Lima Work Program on Gender, which was prolonged during the last COP for validation, or it is valid now for 5 years. And it includes also a new gender action plan that has quite some activities that might be useful for you, not only working on international level, but also on sub-international level, because it refers to very different levels of action for gender just climate action. So let us have a look in those. We will move to the next slide now. Now we are on the next slide. So just in general, you have a decision, which is the Lima work program, and then you have a gender action plan in the annex where you find 30 activities in 5 different areas that define activities, respective outputs, responsibilities, timelines and deadlines, and the level of implementation. And as said, those levels of implementation refer from international to local level. So the first slide is actually presenting you 3 selected activities that can help you in a very basic way to advocate for the basic tools for gender just climate actions, which are actually data. It is gender responsive budgeting and financing gender just climate action, as well as participation. So it also talks about the engagements of women's groups. So this is also very important if you are getting active in policy formulation, implementation, as well as monitoring. So moving on to the next slide, we have a little bit of a more sectoral approach, because what I would like to introduce you now are 3 or 4 activities actually where the Gender Action Plan is recognizing that it is not only important to provide those basics that I have just introduced in the last slide, but it also actually recognizes and can therefore be also used as an argument when you're on the national level by gender responsiveness and gender mainstreaming is important and relevant to make sure that climate action is ambitious, it's effective, and it must be also monitored if this is implemented. Moreover, it also recognizes that local communities and indigenous women must be taken into decision-making, and their knowledge and experiences have to be acknowledged in climate action. Last but not least, climate change is often very much framed as a crisis that can be solved technological or with technologies, but we all know that we think that it is actually a transformation of societies that is needed. Nevertheless, we must know that the Gender Action Plan does also emphasize that technologies must be gender responsive. So just to give you a glance, there are, as I said, 30 more activities that you can have a look into. Many are on capacity building, but those that I have just introduced hopefully help you to strengthen your advocacy. So now I will move on actually to a tool that was developed by BioLoo, and I will just start quickly, Tara, to introduce your gender climate tracker, and then I would hand over to you to add on what I just said. So there has been an update just now on the gender climate tracker with new data and updates on the visuals, and you can also find it in all 3 languages that are provided today, so in English, Spanish, and French. It is not only a website, but also an app, so you can always have the mandates that I just introduced to you, but many more, as well as data and resources on your mobile phone, and make sure that it supports your advocacy. So once you go on the website, you find actually news at the top of the site, and when you go over to that one, you end up in a section where you can find the resources and the newest resources that you can sort by countries, by regions, and also by your language. Moreover, there is a resource section, and if you go to this resource section, you can find directly articles and uploads which help you in your advocacy, and you can also sort it by the just named categories. Importantly, this is exactly the point where you can get into to act. So if you have a resource yourself, you just had a publication or a study you were working on, you can become a gender climate tracker yourself. And when you fill in the form that you can partly see on the screen right now, and what is your resource, you will be able to submit your resource and most probably get an answer from Tara that just presented our great data overview. So don't hesitate to contact and become a gender climate tracker. Moving on to the next slide. If you go to the upper tab that says Gender Mandates and Climate Policy, you can actually choose your field of action. For example, adaptation, compliance, loss and damage, and you will get a list of all mandates that are actually mentioning gender balance, gender responsiveness, or any other gender reference in those mandates, and which can be used for your advocacy. And to make sure that I haven't forgotten anything, I would just quickly hand over to Tara, and then we will continue with the WGC advocacy experiences. Tara, would you like to add anything?
No, Patricia, you did an excellent job. This tool really bridges the presentation that I gave about some different evidence to look at and Patricia's presentation about mandates. There's a lot of different data, more than we can even cover today, that's covered within the site and this app. So we're excited to share it with you and to be in conversation with you about how you can learn more and contribute to it. Thanks.
Thanks so much, Tara. So with that one, I would move on to the next slide on lessons and resources from the WGC advocacy. And I would like to hand over to Ndivile and just quickly give you the hint that we are a little bit behind our time. So if you can speed up a little bit, Ndivile, this would be wonderful. And I will probably message you the moment we should really stop and make a break, because we are behind time. Thanks so much, Ndivile. And I will start with the next slide for you.
Okay, thank you so much, Patricia. I'm back again, and is it okay if I present without the video, because my network is not so good at this time?
That is absolutely fine.
Okay, all right. At the UNFCCC, we use the WGC platform for our advocacy. So I will be highlighting some insights from our advocacy over the years. Be mindful that this is not a full advocacy training, but just an introduction to advocacy that we use at the COP in preparation for climate negotiations, using lessons learned from the WGC. And then our advocacy strategies, as a network, we recognize the power of aligning our work with others with the same interest and goals. The first tip here is to create strategic allies for supporting each other's demands, accepting and sharing leadership roles for certain topics in which others might have more advocacy strength, as well as discussing and developing positions together. Advocacy is a lot about knowing where the decisions are being made and therefore being in the right place at the right time to influence. For an example, during the negotiations, we follow the text development very closely, but also beforehand when when negotiations positions are developed. Then in the current COVID-19 situation, we must find the right opportunities to shape COVID-19 measures as it is now part of the climate change discourse. This is something we will be talking a lot more about in future webinars, using media as well as social media to get the message out there and put pressure on our target audience. We also use events to highlight our key messages, and we will talk about some of those events in the next slide. As feminists, believe in the importance of self-care. Therefore, it is important you to take a break and regroup, because these processes can be very stressful, demanding, and can drain you mentally, physically, and emotionally. Sharing our stories, one of the most powerful pieces of evidence that these solutions are what works is our own stories. Our stories are key tools in our arsenal. It also supports our advocacy towards false solutions and framing. For an example, instead of using the word climate smart agriculture, we will rather speak of sustainable agriculture that encompasses ecology, permaculture farming. And we explain what that means and how it supports small-scale farmers. We often tell these stories through caucuses in the morning at the COP. As you can see in our poster, they're detailing the different themes for daily caucuses, the last COP 25. We hold press conferences as the WGC and as member organizations to directly speak to the media about our demands, highlighting our expertise and experiences that has brought us to these points. We also hold side events at the negotiations to share the stories of our initiative. For an example, at COP25, a side event on the Gucci project, the Gamma methodology, and the gender perspective on sustainable farming and at local level. You can move to the next slide, Patricia. Highlighting our key demands here, WGC also works together prior to each COP to ensure we have written demands. These are collectively written documents translated into French and Spanish, and they help us to directly share with negotiators and other stakeholders what we want to see. They also help us as a constituency to articulate and build power around our aims. The process of formulating these demands help us to always focus on our principles as the WGC, for an example, looking at a system change rather than reforms that won't achieve climate and gender justice. And we think it is critical that in the past few years, we've had this balance of having key demands specific to what's happening in the negotiations, as well as maintaining our overarching points that we want to see in every negotiation session. And one reason we are highlighting the key demands here is that some participants on this webinar may find them helpful in their own framing and understanding of how you want to frame and focus your advocacy locally. We are also looking at organizing at organizations rather, and individuals shaping the development of our demands. Next slide, Patricia. Talking about submissions and policy briefs, we have another opportunity to create written inputs to the negotiation process. And so if you are looking for more information on a specific topic, these are the places to start. Last year at the UNFCCC, we called for submissions on a new gender action plan, and our ideas contributed to the negotiations. But more recently, key members of the WGC worked together on submissions on the Coordinator Joint Work Program on Agriculture. This helps in framing language and showing our expertise for workshop and panel discussions. Also, prior COP25, we produced policy briefs, issues on loss and damage, oceans, climate migration, and Article 6, as these were key issues of the negotiations. There remains a lot of feminist writing and analysis on all of these topics, and of course, these are specifically for the pieces. The next slide, Patricia. This is our advocacy activism, which is one of the most fun and exciting activities. In an overview of some of our WGC advocacy strategies and approaches, which are just samples of how feminists worldwide to influence system change, we have to mention our activism. where we are physically contributing to and participating in and organizing actions when we come together at the climate negotiations, whether those are sanctioned actions or one for which we don't have official permission, but we bring our voices and songs together to show our collective strength and be in solidarity with other observer constituencies. And in cases of marches, it is to be in solidarity with the public. Though this is one of our favorite ways of advocating, it is key to think about this particular type of activism as one type of activism, complemented by the work we do in other avenues and formats. So that's an overview. If this were an advocacy training, we'd also talk about how to advocate about specific text and meetings with negotiators. And we don't want to focus on the negotiations so much, but just to think about all the ways the WGC experiences and resources can contribute to general advocacy for a gender-just climate action. So I will just stop there, and thank you for listening. I'll hand over to you, Patricia. I hope I didn't take much time.
No, you are wonderful in speeding up. So we are still lacking a little bit behind time. So what we would like to do is to give you a very quick outlook of plans of the WGC, and then we give the opportunity to our speakers to select one question from the chat. So if you feel like adding another question, and reply to them in a very short time. So please use the opportunity to also email us after the webinar, and I hope that you can stay about another 8 minutes with us. Tara, would you like to introduce the outlook and plans of the WGC, please?
Absolutely. So if you'll move on to the next slide, you'll see that we're going to be following up this webinar with a two-part webinar series on communications, because that has so much to do with advocacy. So you'll receive more information about this upcoming webinar because you were registered for this one. As we move on to the next slide, we also want to highlight that as the WGC, we're working on building out additional programming for the gender just climate solutions, the over 100 solutions that we have in our database, including online courses that applicants to the gender just climate solutions as well as featured solutions can access. And we just recently did a training on women's entrepreneurship. And as we move on to our final slide, we want to make sure that you recognize that the UNFCCC right now is holding regional workshops on gender. They've held the first one in Asia and the Pacific, which you can find a recording of online and which we can send out after this, but there are 4 more upcoming ones. And it's really important to note that as the WGC, we are working on building up our capacity to organize and strategize at a regional level as well. So we think these are really important moments to help us advance our own advocacy strategies at a more regional level. So with that, we're going to transition straight into a very short discussion session, being mindful of our time. And so I want to first call on our colleague Madina, who received a great question in the chat earlier about crop selection and how they advise and determine crop selection in this drought-prone area for their women smallholder farmers. Madina, would you like to speak quickly to that question? Madina, we can't hear you if you are trying to come in, if you can unmute yourself. If not, while we wait for you to do that, I will see if we can pass it. Oh, Madina, are you there?
Yeah, thank you so much.
Oh, wonderful.
Through our project Mitigation, we test crop varieties with farmers. And after testing the crop varieties, we make analysis based on growth rate, surplus production, adaptability of the crops to the environment, and yield. Afterwards is when we draft conclusions on which crops to grow in a certain place on a given season. Yeah.
Excellent. Thanks so much. Your answer really emphasized the citizen science part of this project and approach. So next, as we move to the final slide, just so that you can see our contact information and know that this doesn't have to be the end of our discussion, even as we wrap up our discussion here today on this webinar, I want to pass over to Sanjay to see if he wants to respond to some of the questions that showed up about BioLoos in the chat earlier. Sanjay, do you have any responses? You can choose which of those questions you preferred.
I'm so sorry, I didn't pay attention to the chat. I was busy with listening to everything. So would you remember any of them for me? I'm so sorry about it.
Yes. No, I know you had several, but one I remember was how do BioLoos help protect women and girls against sexual harassment and violence?
Right. So I'll take real life examples. In the state of India, which has the largest population, the Uttar Pradesh, there were cases as the women. So I mean, there are multiple problems. So for instance, houses that don't have toilets, the women, they either go very early in the morning to defecate. I can't say defecate in the open defecation too, it's a word. So they have to defecate somewhere, be it the bushes or the fields, etc. Likewise, if they need to go in the second half, they prefer the dusk, so there's no light, and they go in the late evenings. So during late evenings, there have been cases of rapes. Unfortunately, teenagers were raped by people in this state. So these are the on-ground problems of not having access to sanitation and toilets.
Thanks so much for that response, Sanjay. I think it really emphasizes what a practical solution can look like on the ground, while highlighting for all of us the importance of all of our advocacy strategies so that we're addressing not only the immediate need, but the root causes that lead to perpetrators of violence committing those acts. So with a final discussion question, I want to share it between Ndivile and Patricia because it concerns something that they both really are very active in, which is how the UNFCCC has been advancing gender just climate solutions. I'm going to paraphrase the question because it was a little bit long, but what is the value of focusing our civil society organizations' efforts at the UNFCCC level? And is it not more efficient to instead look at how we can advance gender justice through policies and actions at a more local level? So can you talk about that balance? Ndivile, I'll ask you to go first.
Thank you, Tara. I think there is a lot of value there in attending to those gender demands at the UNFCCC level, because that will help the national government to get a mandate to say this has been passed. I mean, the Paris Agreement has got some references to gender equality. So we always refer that to when you talk to our national government to say, this is in the preamble of the Paris Agreement that you have to work on gender equality, include gender equality into your climate change actions. And also nationally, yes, that will help us, as I mentioned, that the mandate that is from the UNFCCC, for an example, the Gender Action Plan, which was passed last year. We are able to say to the national government, let's nationalize this because it has been passed from the top. So I think it's working both ways if we address that at local level and also from the international level. Thanks, Tara.
Thank you, Ndivile. Patricia?
I would actually not like to add much more, but emphasize what Ndivile was just referring to, though, that the levels are actually interfering with each other. But now, as the Paris Agreement is moving into an implementation phase, I do think that gender just climate action on national and subnational level will be even more important than before. And this is exactly why we should regionalize and build movements on also smaller levels to support each other and make sure that gender just climate action is really implemented and being made real on all levels, and in particular where solutions are implemented. Nevertheless, we do know that the international level is continuing negotiating, and there are two advantages for us to also act on international level. First, to make sure that in particular fall solutions are not pushed forward more and more throughout the implementation phase. And the second one is that we can actually use the international platform to come together after regionalization and build our movements, strengthen our movements in building up synergies and making sure that we do understand together when we are talking about gender justice and gender just climate action. And with that, I hand over back to you, Tara.
Thanks so much, Patricia. I would just add that one thing this question makes me think of is a video that the Women and Gender Constituency put together about our activities and actions at the climate negotiations at COP25. And it's a video that I would love to share with you all as we do our follow-up from this webinar, because I think it talks about some of the tensions that we experience in trying to advocate in this space and what value we find in coming together as the Women and Gender Constituency in this space. So with that, with the knowledge that we will be sharing out the information from this webinar, additional resources such as this video, this information that you're seeing on your screen right now about how to contact each of the speakers with follow-up information, as well as noting all of the questions that you did already ask in the chat. Those have not been lost, those have been saved, and we will follow up on those. We very much want to thank you for spending your time with us today, and are sorry that we didn't have more time for conversation. We also really want to thank our interpreters for providing the ability for us to have this conversation with more people. Have a great rest of your morning, afternoon, or evening, wherever you may be in the world. And we look forward to continuing to connect with you as the Women and Gender Constituency. Thank you.